Good evening. We're at the finish line. Tonight is the final episode of David Boris's Sharia Crime Stoppers training for law enforcement, and we appreciate your support and your diligence to get through the program. We'll have some new news for you for 2019. This is just the beginning, but tonight we're going to talk. David is going to talk about the deceivers amongst us and basically wrap up the whole topic. Stay tuned with your pencil and paper because there are going to be action items at the end. And we'll invite David to get us off to a fast start tonight. Thank you, David.
Okay, thank you, Dick, and welcome everybody. It's been a quick 16 weeks or whatever, and we're off and running again. I want to close out the webinar by addressing the deceivers amongst us who are part of the deception of political correctness that there is no nexus between terrorism and subversion to Islam. I then plan to cover the push to make us believe that the right-wing white nationalist threat is the most serious problem we face, followed by, as Dick said, some action steps we can all take to confront the grand jihad at the local level. So let's get started. And by way of a quick review, we must again look at the principal tools of deception employed by the fundamentalists when they deal with non-Muslims. One means of dissimulation is taqiyya, also referred to as sacred lying. Some believe it is to be used to deny one's faith or belief in Islam when a Muslim is threatened or under duress because of their beliefs in a non-Muslim country. And the meaning of the word another meaning of the word is it's obligatory to lie to a non-Muslim if the Islamic goal is to be achieved is obligatory. Because it is a stated goal of Islam to impose Sharia law over mankind, it becomes obligatory for fundamentalists to deny such a goal exists. A second form of Islamic deception is kitman, or the communications of a partial truth through the omission of pertinent facts. For example, the fundamentalists claim that Islam is a religion of peace, even though no peace can be realized until Sharia becomes the sole law over mankind. Or the claim that the Muslim Brotherhood is against terrorism, when in fact, according to Sharia, only non-Muslims are called terrorists when they kill a Muslim. I remind law enforcement officers that lying and deception are challenges we face every day, so their use by the Muslim Brotherhood is nothing new as long as we recognize it and know how to confront it. The big loophole, while a loophole of deception, is found in Maruna, or the total suspension of any Sharia prohibition in order to achieve a higher Islamic interest or benefit. One example of this is Abedin, being allowed to marry a former Jewish congressman and work for Hillary Clinton while she served as the Secretary of State. Abedin had access to top-secret information, even though she had close ties with the Muslim Brotherhood and the Institute of Muslim Minority Affairs. Under Sharia, you recall, a Muslim woman is forbidden to marry a non-Muslim man. Another example is Veronica Herrera, the director of the Muslim Advocates, the group that demanded all federal law enforcement training be purged in 2011. And Ingrid Mattson, former president of the Islamic Society of North America. Both are affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, and they have been given a pass or exemption to the Sharia rule that men don't work for women in a subordinate role. You can also see that Herrera does not feel obligated to be covered as Sharia law mandates. These three Muslim women are part of a concerted effort of the Muslim Brotherhood to mislead non-Muslims that there is sexual equality and empowerment of women under Sharia law. Another deceiver is Dalia Mogahed, a former member of the Obama administration's Office of Faith-Based Partnerships. Here she is promoting the canard that Muslim women have nothing to be concerned about Sharia and how they are treated under Islamic law. Mogahed publicly denies that there are any Sharia-sanctioned crimes against women and denies that that there is any allegedly inherent misogyny practiced by Muslim men. Shireen Pasha claims to have been born and raised a Muslim who initially was led to believe jihad represented bloodshed and bombs with bearded men waving Kalashnikovs. Now she realizes this connotation is all wrong, that jihad really represents her daily struggle to get up out of bed and get her children ready to go to school. A similar belief promoted by Bashra Alwi of the Detroit FBI office, who told a local group of peace officers, if you recall, her jihad was a struggle against cheesecake. Returning to Shireen Pasha, she at least acknowledges there is a problem with sexual misconduct against women, something denied by Delia Mogahed. Pasha is an assistant professor of journalism at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and is trying to instill public awareness about Muslim clerics who assault women they are counseling. The problem with her and others like her is that she is unwilling to admit that Islam has had a historical problem with Muslim men sexually abusing both Muslim and non-Muslim women, but has also had a bigger problem attempting to conquer non-Muslim countries through jihad. This unwillingness to come clean publicly is another aspect of how Islam is protected by deception. Yet another aspect of deception involves honor violence and murder of Muslim women who fail to obey the rules of Sharia, especially concerning dress codes. We saw numerous examples of Muslim women being killed for not being properly covered during the webinar of Sharia and women. This is why it is a red flag when Muslim women who should know better state that women are treated honorably under Islam and there is no requirement for a Muslim female to be covered. Remember the example of Dr. Kinta Ahmad we looked at previously, who also denies it's required by Sharia to be covered. And one final look at the verse that commands otherwise. O Prophet, tell your wives and daughters to draw their veils all over their bodies so that they will be known and not harmed. Chapter 33, verse 59. Farhana Qazi has written Invisible Martyrs Inside the Secret World of Female Islamic Radicals. She was born a Muslim in northern Pakistan and has provided training to the United States military and Department of Homeland Security. She is also an apologist for Islam. Here she obviously attempts to lead us in the opposite direction from 1400 years of Islamic jihad, and makes this outlandish statement how Muslim women choose to follow a perverted form of Islam, and claims Muhammad promoted the status of women but totally ignores his marriage to a 6-year-old girl that he consummated when she was 9 and whom Muhammad later assaulted for disobedience. Qazi also declares violent jihad has nothing to do with Islam. Qazi is at total odds with the teachings of the 4 schools of Sunni jurisprudence as well as the consensus of Muslim scholars about classical Islamic threat doctrine. This is deception of the highest order. I highly recommend Dr. Stephen Kirby's analysis of Qazi's book, in which he totally refutes the various misleading and inaccurate statements that she makes. This has been recently published within the last couple of weeks. In fact, Stephen Kirby has addressed a whole group of individuals who promote myths and other misleading and totally false beliefs about Islam. Although many of these individuals may be well-intended, many others, as we'll see, are not, and are purposely trying to deceive us. Nonetheless, the game of fantasy Islam has much appeal to the useful idiots among us who don't want to face facts or who have been victimized by our political correct multicultural education system. It's also played by Muslims like Qazi, who are all too eager to promote such beliefs even though they aren't based on historical fact or Islamic doctrine as stated in the Quran or the recorded words and deeds of Muhammad. Dr. Kirby goes on to say that the purveyors of the fantasy Islam are the largest obstacle to our understanding of the threat we face. To this statement, I would add the two formidable roadblocks to our understanding that we have seen in action since the opening of our webinar series. First, our Western mindset about religions that tells us all are peaceful and deserve full protection under the First Amendment. And the second roadblock, of course, is being the purge of all Islamic threat training given to Department of Defense, Homeland Security, and Department of Justice personnel. Undeterred, Kazi continued her fantasy Islam beliefs in an article published on November 29th. Not only did she claim Islam is still misunderstood, misappropriated, and misinterpreted, she continues to characterize Islam as a loving and peaceful. And more significantly, recently I was asked to give a talk to U.S. government officials, and someone commented on a question I presented in my talk. Is Islam a violent religion? Obviously, the answer is no. The official in the audience stated that there is a sizable group of Americans who do believe that Islam is violent, barbaric, and savage. This type of fabrication on the part of Kazi and misinformation cannot be ignored and left unchallenged. She is obviously going public with her nonsense and continues to provide training to law enforcement authorities. Have you ever wondered whatever happened to Sheriff David Clark, formerly from Milwaukee? Well, enter Hidayat Miramati, with whom Clark formed a business partnership, DAC Enterprises. And here she is in one of her more pious moments. And here in more happier times. And she obviously has access to high places. Unfortunately, she has a day job of training law enforcement about Islam. Through her International Cultural Center, she has trained at the Department of Defense conferences, the FBI, the National Fusion Center, and the Director of National Intelligence himself. She currently serves on the Los Angeles Police Department's Community Police Advisory Board. Her night job is femme fatale. Remember, anything for the cause, or honey trap jihad. Let's turn to these three Muslim women who are doing their best to mislead us about Islam. Mona Shak on the left, Zara Bilou, and Linda Sassor on the right. These women are just examples of many others, both men and women, who are spinning the true nature of the threat. Mona Shak may not be familiar to many, but she represents Muslims who are speaking publicly about how peaceful Islam is. Following the San Bernardino jihadist attack, Shak placed an ad in her local paper in Fremont, California, inviting people to meet a Muslim at a local coffee shop. 100 people showed up, and because of its popularity, she has hosted similar events in San Francisco, Arizona, and Atlanta. As of May 2018, she has spoken at 150 such events. According to Hugh Fitzgerald, who has written at least 3 articles about her, she pushes a highly misleading version and deceptive presentation of Islam that consists of a network group that is involved in Muslim outreach by promoting such verses of peace like 532. We ordained for the children of Israel that if anyone slew a person, it would be as if he slew the whole people, and if anyone saved a life, it would be as if he saved the life of the whole people. This verse is often quoted to demonstrate how serious Islam considers murder and how precious it is to save the life of another person. What Shak and others don't tell their listeners is what's in the very next verse. Quote, the only reward of those who make war upon Allah and his messenger will be that they will be killed or crucified or have their hands and feet on alternate sides cut off. Another verse that Shak and other Muslim deceivers often quote is 109:1. Unto you your religion and unto me mine. Or chapter 2, verse 256, there shall be no compulsion in religion. Both purport to show that Islam allows others to worship as they please and does not force anyone to accept Islam. What these deceivers don't say is these verses were received while Muhammad was in Mecca. It was not until 622 when he and his followers went to Medina when true Islam was revealed in such commands from Allah like this one in chapter 9:29. Engage in war with those who do not believe in Allah. Remember the doctrine of abrogation that voids the peaceful verses of Mecca with the final commands from Allah received later in Medina. And one more point to remember, if there's no compulsion in religion of Islam, why are apostates to be killed for leaving Islam? 3 more examples of Shah's deception. American women were given the right to vote in 1920. No Islamic state granted voting rights prior to that date. It wasn't until 1930 that Turkey authorized women to vote in local elections, in 1934 in national elections. Syria followed in 1949, Egypt and Lebanon in 57, Iran in 63, Jordan in 74, Iraq in 1980, and Kuwait in 2005. And last but not least, Saudi Arabia in 2015. Shah also claims wife beating has nothing to do with Sharia. But what about verse 434 that we've looked at many times that grants husbands permission to beat their disobedient wives? And finally, she promotes we're all one big happy family, but again fails to tell the real story that Allah commands that Muslims not take Christians and Jews as friends in verse 551. Shah is not the only one involved in the Ask a Muslim Anything program. Another is Robert Aziz, and there are many others as well. Hopefully, following this webinar, you feel sufficiently armed with information to challenge their statements. The Islamic Network Group is just one of many such organizations providing speakers to schools and civic groups who promote a diluted, political correctness-friendly version of Islam. Well, let's take a quick look at Zahra Billoo, who is the executive director of the Northern California chapter of CARE. She has a history of praising the terrorist jihadist group Hezbollah. According to the Clarion Project, as well as she has voiced support for Hamas against Israel, she also suggested that fallen U.S. soldiers should not be honored on Memorial Day. She's also served as an advisor to the Muslim Student Association West chapter from 2005 to 2010. With all this information about her background, it's hard to justify why an interfaith organization named People Acting in Community Together, or PACT, would give her a special award. Fortunately, pro-Israeli activists put pressure on PACT to have the award rescinded. But not so fast. Because of pressure from other Bay Area activists and civil rights groups, the interfaith group reversed itself and reinstated Billoo's special award. This is one more example of the deception of CARE and its associates at work. And on November 27th, the Investigative Project on Terrorism reported how Billoo turned her wrath on fellow Muslim Air Force Sergeant Abdul Rahman by mocking his recent receipt of a waiver to keep his beard while in uniform. Speaking of awards involving CARE, here's one proclaiming December 9th, 2018, CARE Texas Houston Day by Mayor Sylvester Turner. Another progressive, another useful idiot of the red-green axis, all working together to subvert our Constitution. Our third Muslim woman needs no introduction, as we've referenced Linda Sarsour on several previous occasions. For whatever reason, the current crop of feminists have welcomed her with open arms. That certainly is indicative of the red-green axis that confronts us. Taser continues to show her true colors in plain sight, this time with Sarah Wahaj, by speaking together at an event hosted by the Islamic Circle of North America, one of the Muslim Brotherhood's organizations listed on the explanatory memorandum. Surprise, surprise, the founder of the Women's March has seen the light. Teresa Shook has asked both Sassour and Tramika Mallory to step down because of their anti-Semitic and his homophobic statements. Even though she's been removed from her leadership role, Sassour is still promoting the next Women's March in January. Well, now let's turn to the recent elections, where we'll find more deception at work. 2 of the 57 Muslims recently elected to a local, state, or federal office on November 6th. Ilhan Omar, a refugee from Somalia, is now representing Minnesota's 5th congressional district. And Rashida Tlaib was elected to the 13th district in Michigan. 2 more at the state legislature level elected. Salifa Wazar from Afghanistan on the left will join the New Hampshire State House, and Holden Hassan from Somalia has been elected to the Minnesota legislature. So why does any of this really matter? Where is the deception? In 2017, following the San Bernardino attack, the Minnesota State Legislature voted to prevent insurance payments to the families of terrorists who attack Americans. Ilhan Omar voted against the bill that was eventually passed and signed into law. What this demonstrates is that she is clearly a team player and the fundamentalists who support jihadists and their families. This is exactly what the Palestinian leadership has done for years by providing financial assistance to suicide jihadists who attack Israel. By the way, Omar is an outspoken anti-Semite as well as a pro-jihadist. Now she's in the House of Representatives, and there will be more to come like her. Also, there is credible information that she married her brother in 2009 and committed an immigration fraud to enter the United States. Not only does she not want to prevent insurance payments to terrorists or jihadi families, she doesn't want to prevent female genital mutilation either. As for Rashida Tlaib, has something to say about Israel too. Our own United West posted this alert on November 13th. Here Tlaib drapes herself in the Palestinian flag. And here she participates in a pro-jihad rally in Detroit in 2014. While speaking about support for terrorists or jihadists, Tlaib and Omar are in good company. 99 of their Marxist Democratic colleagues signed letters of support for CARE, the fundraising arm for Hamas in America and a Muslim Brotherhood front group. And we wonder why we can't designate the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. And as recently reported by Ryan Morrow of the Clarion Intelligence Network, our next crop of Democratic presidential candidates supports this Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood front group as well. Speaking of lists, here's another that shows the top 10 university leaders who support terrorism. Money talks. Saudi Arabia has given over $614 million to elite universities in America since 2011. With the Marxist Democrats primed to take control of the House of Representatives, the Judiciary Committee is poised to refocus away from the illegalities of the left during the 2016 election, and now go after so-called white nationalism in America. One of the issues the Marxists plan to explore is whether the Trump administration is improperly overhauling Obama's Countering Violent Extremism program in a way that targets Muslims. So what's at play here? We learned that nearly 100 Senate and House Democrats have sent letters of support to the Muslim Brotherhood front group, an unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation trial, and the fundraising arm of Hamas in the United States. We also know that many in academia support the fundamentalists, and our Marxist friends are out in the open as reported by Breitbart on December 4th of this year. 68% of Democrats believe employers should provide special prayer space to Muslim employees, but only 45% employers have a similar obligation to Christian workers. The same poll also revealed that urbanites, millennials, and women were far more supportive of Muslim followers than of Christians. A side comment at this point, let's stop using the words progressive or left when labeling our political opponents. Let's call them Marxists. Our fight involves an insurgency against our way of life and governance, and is no longer just political in nature. What's going on is an overt attempt to again exaggerate the right-wing threat and greatly minimize or totally obfuscate the true threat by lumping all threats together. So we again return to two slides shown during webinar number 2 when we covered the purge. This is the updated version. We see all these names. Notice how none of them refer to the Islamic threat. Before we start our blender, let's not forget the new threat to America, white nationalism. Pay close attention how the Marxists define this term and broaden it to include all Americans who are patriotic, respect the rule of law, and want to maintain our sovereignty. Once again, there will be no hesitation by Marxists to focus our attention on right-wing groups now called white nationalists. This automatically excludes all other groups not considered white. And we'll see token recognition to future terrorist attacks as being inspired at best by ISIS, but committed by someone who is mentally ill. Or the Marxists will simply say they have no clue who the perpetrator is and his motive, just like in Las Vegas. So the moral equivalency rule remains alive and well to make CARE happy. By claiming all extremists are the same and equally dangerous with absolutely no connection to Islam. And a side benefit to all this, the Marxists pick up the Muslim vote in 2020, and organizations like Jetpack Incorporated gain leverage. Jetpack, aka Justice, Education, Technology, Policy Advocacy Center, just one group advising and promoting Muslim political candidates in Maine, New York, Rhode Island, and California, part of the Muslim Brotherhood's full court press to support Muslim Brotherhood supporters and acolytes nationally. And remember how money gets laundered to political campaigns of both Muslims and non-Muslims alike. All part of the 1987 playbook that described the use of political action front groups with no traceable ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. Two more examples of the deception reported November 21st in the New York Times. An opinion piece authored by Harun Mogul, who promotes Muhammad in a happy birthday message and presents himself and all Muslims as perpetual victims of racism and Islamophobia. While another opinion article appeared in the Times offering that Islam does not kill blasphemers. This one, authored by Mustafa Akoil, who states not one of the 6,236 verses in the Quran tell Muslims to stifle blasphemy by force. Well, there's one that does. The penalty for those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger is that they be killed or crucified, or that their hands and feet be cut off from the opposite sides. Just one example of the nonviolent verses, according to our author, that show how Muslims should treat blasphemers. Not only are these two authors attempting to deceive us, but what about the New York Times? Is there any editorial attempt to set the record straight? An example of someone we all recognize from Fox News who should know better. Just another apologist for Islam who is deceiving the American public by joining the ranks of those who claim the jihadists have hijacked and perverted peaceful Islam. Well, now for some good news. Muslim woman taking a stand against so-called extremist versions of Islam, in particular Wahhabism. As reported on November 20th by Mahoney Niza in the publication Muslim World Today, Niza has found nearly 300 Muslim women who are taking positive steps to counter Islam's treatment of women. One member of her group is Dr. Humaira Ahmed Kamar, 52, from Florida, who says, "I am tired of the misogynistic, patriarchal, judgmental bigots who currently control the face of Islam, as well as the radical Wahhabi Muslims who espouse narrow, rigid, anti-women views." The group targets women who are secular-minded, enlightened, moderate, and some who are not practicing Muslims, but are more cultural. Not all of the members subscribe to the Quran, but those who do focus mostly on the spirit of the text, not its literal meaning, and most agree with that the hadiths, or recorded words and deeds of Muhammad, should not be emphasized or followed because much of their accuracy has been lost because they were compiled many years after Muhammad's death and are not accurate or reliable. We can certainly take exception to their religious beliefs, but not their courage in speaking out. Unfortunately, we must exercise due diligence that these women might also be part of the deception. One more bit of good news. Here are two who went public in 2015 asking non-Muslim women not to wear the hijab in solidarity with Muslim women, followed by another article published by the New York Times by Azra Nomani and Halal Arafa, two Muslim activists. Unfortunately, there is a high price to pay for defiance and disobeying the rules. Another example of the price for speaking out. Christine Douglas Williams was fired by the Canadian government for speaking out against Islam, as described in a report published by the Center for Security Policy dated September 2018. Another Muslim activist whom we have met previously is Shireen Kadozi, who publishes the Kadozi Chronicles. Most recently, she is warning us on the new form of censorship, peer policing, that will be targeting people on social media who are deemed offensive and not politically correct. Before we leave the topic of deceivers among us, I want to introduce you to Mona Elwawe, an Egyptian-American feminist writer. She's as outspoken as the title of her book suggests and is very much against the suppression of women through the insistence of hijabs or headscarves and the use of female genital mutilation to control a Muslim sexuality. Her book sets her apart from many of the deceivers we previously looked at. She condemns the forces of misogyny by calling for action to combat it. This would be an ideal book for younger, non-Muslim women who unfortunately are in denial about this issue and are obsessed with political correctness and multiculturalism, an obsession that is reinforced, as we said, by deception. So who are these women? You might recognize Auntie Cyrus is in the upper left. On December 11th, the Coalition of Muslim, Jewish, and Christians held a press conference at the National Press Club in Washington Depicted here are just some of the members who are speaking out against child marriages, FGM, honor killings, and Islamic dress codes. The president of the group, Rabia Kazan, said, President Obama created ISIS and encouraged Sharia law throughout the Middle East, and for 8 years he turned a deaf ear to our cries. Finally, there is hope for us because of President Trump. Where were all the deceivers during this conference? Where were the Muslim women for Congress? Where was Linda Sarsour, Mona Ishaq, and Farhana Kazi? And is the mainstream media even going to report this event? One more bright spot reported on the Clarion Project by the Clarion Project on December 16th is FACE, or Facing Abuse in Community Environments. It is a group that serves as an independent first line of defense for victims in the Muslim community who have suffered abuse from their religious and community leaders. Depicted here are Muslim women protesting in Chicago. Enough of the far too many examples of the deception that we are confronted with about Islam. Let's now focus our attention on some of the newsworthy items that became known since our webinar series first aired, especially the one titled The Current Threat. We need to pay more attention to our northern border with Canada, especially in light of Trudeau's open-door policy toward ex-ISIS jihadists. Thomas Quiglin, author of Submission, The Danger of Political Islam to Canada, warns us to the threat. And a Canadian terrorism expert, David Harris, says an attack against the United States is just a matter of time. Unfortunately, Canadian law enforcement has been totally compromised. Meanwhile, there is continued emphasis for Muslim males to marry non-Muslim females to get them to convert to Islam and have more Muslim babies. And if the non-Muslim female fails to convert, ensure she gets pregnant so the child is raised a Muslim regardless. As for narco-jihad, illegal drugs are a weapon of choice against non-Muslims in both Canada and the United States, in order to raise money for jihadists as well as a means to kill through overdoses. In 2017 alone, 75,000 Americans were killed from illegal drug use and the abuse of prescription medications, and a sizable number of these deaths were caused by the partnership between jihadists and the Mexican drug cartels. As reported by the Clarion Project on November 15th, the State Department has confirmed the increased presence of both Iran and Hezbollah throughout Latin and South America. Iran has converted and radicalized thousands of Latin Americans by sending imams to the region and building mosques and cultural centers, numbering more than 100 today. And on November 18th, another article addressed the issue with Hezbollah in Argentina by Shireen Kadozi. Kadozi reported that the triple frontier area of Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina is the most important Hezbollah base outside Lebanon. As for why Argentina, there is a large Lebanese expatriate community there. Argentina is also anti-Israel and has a long history of sheltering Jewish haters or Nazis following World War II. Remember the alliance that has been struck between jihadists and the narco-terrorists in Mexico and the ISIS training sites along our Tex-Mex border that we talked about previously. Reported in Jihad Watch on November 19th by Robert Spencer, more reinforcements captured along the Tex border. During October, 75 Bangladeshi nationals were captured and 668 were captured during FY 2018. This represents a 270% increase over last year, with each paying up to $27,000 apiece to the narco-terrorists to cross our border. Al-Qaeda has been advocating the use of arson by independent jihadists for years. Now they're calling for more arson attacks, especially in light of the recent California fires. Fires that we still don't know the cause of and may never be given one for months. During an interview with Mark Levine last Sunday on December 8th, Representative Steve Scalise revealed this information about the number of terrorists captured each day along our southern border. So these are the ones we know about. How many evade capture every day? Meanwhile, the Marxist progressives in Congress don't support the wall, want to disband ICE, and support open borders. Why information like this isn't publicized by the president is beyond me. In addition to prevent known or suspected terrorists from entering the United States, Department of Homeland Security also intercepted 17,526 criminals, 1,019 gang members, and 3,028 special interest aliens, not to mention all the illegal drugs confiscated. There is no better case for a wall. Also in November, a first-of-its-kind report was issued by Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security about terrorist-related activity. Note, this is the first such report to the American people, an obvious indicator of how the truth about the jihadist threat is being suppressed. Unfortunately, the report does not indicate how many of the 402 foreign-born terrorists were Muslims, or how many of the remaining non-foreign-born terrorists were converts to Islam, or second and third generation Muslims, information our government certainly has. Before leaving his post as Attorney General, Jeff Sessions once again reminds us that border security is in fact national security. Well, no sooner was the Department of Justice and Homeland Security report released than this report was issued by the progressives to dilute the impact of foreign-born terrorism by turning our attention to white supremacists and anti-government extremists like militia groups and sovereign citizens. And the full court press is on. This aired by ABC on December 5th. Remember some of the tactics used by the left to cook the books when they try to minimize the Islamic threat of jihad. The left does not count all jihadist attacks as terrorism. The left counts as terrorism fights between inmates in prison. The left always starts its counts on 9/12, not on 9/11. It does not refer to the lethality, but only the single events, regardless how many fatalities there are. And finally, the left or Marxists never count the thousands of people who have died or acquired serious medical problems as a result of the 9/11 attack in New York at the World Trade Center. You don't have to look any further than its annual GAO report on countering violent extremism, the last one released in April of 2017, to encounter further proof of how the books are being cooked to minimize the jihadi threat to America. Again, the count starts on September 12, 2001, and asserts there have been 106 fatalities caused by far-right violent extremists in 62 separate incidents and 119 deaths caused by radical Islamists in 23 separate incidents, all occurring between September 12, 2001 and December 31st, 2016. And look who's jumped on the bandwagon. Farhana Kazi, who was deceiving us about Islam and is now branching out to claim right-wing extremism in America is on the rise. This one reported on December 13. To make her point, Kazi references a 2016 Newsweek article full of misleading information, and she provides this photograph to drive home her narrative that white families are trained to attack in America. As for all the jihadi attacks in America since 9/11, Kazi attributes them all to, quote, non-practicing Muslims, end of quote. The truth is that jihadists are devout, understand jihadist doctrine, quote chapter and verse in the Quran to justify their acts, follow the example set by Muhammad after 622, and are all willing to die for their beliefs. Before we leave our discussion about right-wing extremists versus jihadists, let's return briefly to the GAO report. So how does the federal government define a right-wing extremist? Let's turn to the definition found in the U.S. Extremist Crime Database, the same definition used by the GAO report. Let's see how many of these we can identify with. Right-wing extremists are fiercely nationalistic, anti-global, suspicious of federal authority, reverent of individual liberties, especially gun ownership. They believe in conspiracy theories and threats to the national security, and beliefs that their personal or national way of life is under attack and must be prepared to defend against this attack. Now take a moment to let these attributes of a right-wing extremist set in. This is how law-abiding citizens are starting to be demonized by the federal government. Taken together, these traits go a long way towards defining a conservative, patriotic, law-abiding American who loves his country. Now this person is being labeled a right-wing extremist, or worse, a white male nationalist. This is an example of the red-green axis at work. Now let's look at how Al-Qaeda-influenced Islamist fundamentalists is defined. Only acceptance of Islam promotes human dignity. Islamists reject the traditional Muslim respect for people of the book. Islamists, they believe jihad is a defining belief in Islam and includes the lesser jihad, and they believe that Islamic law provides the blueprint for a modern Muslim society and should be forcibly implemented. Remember what all jihadists want. We've talked about this before. They want to defeat all enemies, kill apostates, purify Islam once and for all, follow the literal word of the Quran, establish a caliphate, impose Sharia law over mankind, and prepare to die for their beliefs. Extremists on the far right are not part of a global network. They are not religiously sanctioned. They are not trying to conquer all opposition. They're not willing to die for their cause. They're not performing an act of worship through violence. They're not demanding female suppression. They're not committing criminal acts based on religious beliefs. They're not trying to subvert our Constitution. They're not committing bombings by suicide or attempting to impose a theocracy under Sharia law over mankind. And most important, right-wing extremists don't have a 1400-year historical record of conquest and murder. We've spoken about the influence of social Marxists previously. David Risolata's new book, Psychopolitics in America, A Nation Under Conquest, addresses how psychological warfare is being waged against us through a process called ideological subversion. The similarities between the tactics of soft jihad and Marxists are stunning. Also in November, the Investigative Project on Terrorism released information about how CARE continues to thwart law enforcement in general, and the FBI in particular. And during the same period, Muslim men continue to target American women. While on November 5th, 2018, Muslim Uber driver Khalid Dasa, 35, is charged for kidnapping, and in Pennsylvania on November 22nd, another Uber driver, Ahmad Mustafa El-Ghafi, 26, is charged for raping his passenger. Reported on November 23rd in Golden, Colorado, Ahmad Muz was charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, and harassment. Another jihadist vehicle attack reported on November 27, 2018, involving a Somali Muslim, Mohammed Abdi, 32, who targeted two men outside a synagogue in Los Angeles. Just like a previous jihadist attacks, local law enforcement officials are looking for a motive. Meanwhile, we're all reminded of our new normal following several jihadi vehicle attacks, while our federal government still does not present accurate training to those who are supposed to protect us from the jihadist and Muslim Brotherhood threat. The next three jihadists were all reported on December 10th. In Florida, Nadim Siddiqui plotted to attack the Adventure Turnberry Jewish Center in South Florida. In Ohio, Demon Joseph, a convert to Islam, for plotting to attack two synagogues and to kill a rabbi. Joseph took up the new name of Abdullah Ali Yusuf and told authorities he wanted to select a target that would produce the most casualties. And then in Missouri, 18-year-old William James Nelson pledged his allegiance to Allah and plotted to attack Branson High School. With the remaining time available this evening, let's review some of the major points addressed during our previous sessions together and cover some action steps you can take to defend your community against the threat of Islamic fundamentalism. So have pen and paper ready, as Dick suggested. Throughout the webinar program, we have looked at 8 key doctrines of Islam shown here. As a way to review our quest to know our enemy, it might be helpful to briefly review each, as they are being vigorously promoted by the fundamentalists in their efforts to establish Sharia over mankind. The first pertains strictly to Muslims. Takfirism, briefly stated, means to designate an action or person un-Islamic. For a Muslim to be so labeled, it represents an extreme form of betrayal to the faith and disloyalty to the Ummah or Muslim community at large. Think of the term as a form of banishment or excommunication from the fold. This, then, is the means fundamentalists use to keep Muslims in line through fear, intimidation, and coercion into silence or face the alternative that they will be called out as a traitor to Islam and to Muslims, thus labeling anyone designated an enemy of Islam. It becomes a verbal weapon that extends to non-Muslims as well. Non-believers are called kufirs, and more recently, if they dare speak out against Islam, they are called Islamophobes or racists. The doctrine of loyalty and enmity is certainly related to takfirism. Simply put, a Muslim is expected to be loyal to all Muslims, just like members of the tribe are loyal to the collective. Non-tribal members are to be held in enmity and contempt. We see numerous references in the Quran that tell Muslims not to take Christians and Jews as friends. We've also seen how fundamentalist Islam divides the world into two parts: the House of Islam, where Sharia rules, and the House of War, where the enemies of Islam dwell. By imposing a rigorously enforced code of silence among Islam's followers concerning Sharia crimes, and by keeping Muslims rigidly segregated within enclaves when they live in non-Sharia governed areas. It can be argued that the doctrine of honor-shame is more cultural than uniquely Islamic. Nonetheless, a strong case can be made otherwise because of the various Sharia-sanctioned crimes that promote honor and punish shameful behavior. One such crime is the exemption parents from legal consequences for the killing of their offspring who bring shame to their family, such as a daughter who cannot prove her virginity on her wedding night, or the punishment a woman faces for being raped unless she can produce 4 male witnesses who will testify in her behalf. One thing is certain: the response of the dishonored person, the dishonored family, or the Ummah will always be disproportionate to the offense in order to reestablish honor. We learned that the doctrine of dawah goes way beyond proselytizing. It is nothing short of pre-jihad. By persuading non-Muslims to either convert to Islam or agree to submit to Sharia practices and live according to its rules. Non-Muslims either accept these conditions or face the mandatory consequences of jihad to impose Sharia law. Dawah is the current strategy being employed by the Muslim Brotherhood to subvert our Constitution through an alliance with social Marxists without firing a shot. The doctrine of dimitude is the part of Dawah process whereby Christians and Jews are given the option to submit to Sharia rule and obey the conditions established centuries ago in the Pact of Omar, given as an alternative to people of a book, an alternative to conversion to Islam or to the consequences of jihad. In addition to agreeing to abide by the stipulations of submission and humiliation, Christians and Jews must also agree to pay the special poll tax called jizya to their Muslim masters. In exchange for their agreement, Christians and Jews receive protection from Islamic jihad. In fact, there are many who claim that the Muslim Brotherhood has already launched an imposed dimitude process in many places within America today. Muslim refugees are being paid to live within their enclaves through our welfare system. These enclaves have become an established part of a parallel society ruled by Sharia that has already found its way into U.S. courts. Muslim demands for special privileges are occurring with ever-increasing frequency through the use of lawfare. In short, we are submitting to a hostile foreign force, as we've already agreed through the training purge to facilitate their conquest. Earlier, we reviewed the 3 principal means of fundamentalist deception: Taqi, or sacred lying; Kitman, the withholding of all information and presenting a partial truth; and finally Maruna, which permits the forbidden to be permissible as long as it's necessary to advance the noble cause of Sharia dominance. But there's one more that the fundamentalists don't want us to know about: Tasir, or the means that permit a Muslim to lessen the burdens of Sharia-mandated requirements when a Muslim is living as a minority in a non-Islamic country. For example, it may not always be possible for a Muslim to pray at a prescribed time because of the infidel-imposed work rules. No problem. If you miss a prayer time, just make it up when you can. The same for Sharia-compliant dress codes for female Muslim workers. Tasir constitutes a waiver from the hijab. The deception kicks in because we're not aware of Tasir and are led to believe all Sharia rules must be obeyed without exception. And out of pity or political correctness, we grant an Islamic privilege to the Muslim, thereby becoming complicit in the ultimate goal of conquest. The next doctrine that facilitates conquest is hijrah. It means to migrate from one geographic location to another, just like the example of Muhammad and his small band of followers who fled from Mecca to Medina in 622. This act of Muhammad established the pattern for Muslim migration that has been used ever since. Muslims are to flee a hostile area for a peaceful non-Muslim area for eventual conquest. This becomes another tool for dawah, or pre-jihad, whereby Muslims slowly take over a targeted area by increasing their demographic, not only by adding Muslim immigrants, but by procreation and inspiring conversions to Islam. Taken together, as the numbers increase, so too the entire process of Islamization of the host nation's culture and form of governance. This colonialization is the fuel for the insurgency we're facing. Our problem when it comes to the doctrine of jihad is that we view it as warfare for the sake of conquest. This is a Western mindset, and we will never understand its true significance unless we refocus to a fundamentalist mindset. Muhammad had the ultimate goal to establish Allah's rule over mankind. How to make this happen? His initial attempts in Mecca didn't work so well, so he had to find a way to unify the hundreds of dispersed Bedouin tribes. How best to transform an independent tribal mindset into a collective, unified force, all believing in the same ultimate goal as Muhammad. A unified force of unrelated tribes that would no longer fight each other, but would refocus their innate military preoccupation and ingrained combativeness for Allah, a God they never heard of before. Thus, the doctrine of jihad and the super tribe were born. In Medina, by agreeing not to fight each other, these tribal warriors were unleashed to conquer non-Muslims outside the big tribe, and the new warriors for Allah were allowed to keep the good stuff. Keep the good stuff after battle. Or, if they died, they would qualify for immediate entry into the heretofore unknown cyber brothel populated by hyper-celestial virgins and all programmed for continuous carnal pleasure on demand. All of this finally revealed for the first time by Muhammad. As Raymond Ibrahim concludes, the appeal of Muhammad's message lay in its compatibility with the tribal mores of his society, which created an ummah faith community that transcends racial, national, and linguistic barriers to this very day. After Muhammad's death, the new male ummah warriors were unleashed not for conquest, rather for futha, opening for the light of Islam to enter for the liberation and true freedom for infidels. Thus, jihad was conceived in altruistic terms as an expression of religious devotion for Allah, for the good of mankind. And this has served as its justification ever since, to kill non-Muslims who don't convert to Islam or submit to its rule. This legitimization is found in the Islamic theology within the Quran, is reflected in the recorded words and deeds of Muhammad, and the actions of his successors ever since. Actions superbly documented most recently by Robert Spencer and Raymond Ibrahim. We would be remiss if we did not address one of the biggest deceptions currently underway, the systematic and purposeful persecution of Christians throughout the Middle East and in many African countries. Again, Raymond Ibrahim has thoroughly documented the historical genesis of the problem that is inbred in Islamic ideology. What we must confront is why we know so little about the persecution and its existence. Ibrahim identifies three contributing factors, and I'll offer a fourth. Because of political correctness, fear, and money, academic officials have totally whitewashed Islam and its persecution of Christians. As for the money, our elite colleges and universities, as we have seen, has received millions of dollars from Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries in exchange for which they expect no criticism of Islam, Muslims, or any hint that there is a nexus between Islam and jihad. As for the media, many of its members have sat through the Middle Eastern studies programs that are influenced by the factors previously mentioned. In addition, many in today's media suffer from an animus against Christians in general and feel that Christians over there are suffering from the natural consequences of what they did to Muslims during the Crusades and more recently during the colonization period of Middle Eastern countries by Europe during the late 1800s and 1900s. As for the Obama administration, where do you begin? In the words of Rabin Ibrahim, quote, the Obama administration has not only ignored Muslim persecution of Christians, but also actually enabled it, end of quote, through his support of the so-called Arab Spring movement. Obama encouraged and empowered fundamentalists and jihadi groups to lash out against Christian minorities, not only in the Middle East, but throughout Africa, through Obama's misguided support of the Muslim Brotherhood under Mohammed Morsi in Egypt. The examples of the consequences of Christians residing in the Middle East and Africa to Obama's outreach to the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamists are well documented. My final reason for total whitewash of the Muslim persecution of Christians is because of the total failure of Christian pastors to even acknowledge that the persecution exists, let alone take any steps to protect the Christians facing extreme harm or death. When is the last time your pastor called his flock to pray for their fellow Christians being persecuted? The silence is deafening. When's the last time your pastor even acknowledged the scope of the problem or identify who the persecutors even are? This is just one more example of Sharia-sanctioned crimes that constitute a genocide, all being ignored by the majority of pastors in America that are supposed to be shepherds and protectors of their flock. Well, we began our webinar journey here with the biggest deception of all, that Islam is just like all religions, fully protected by the First Amendment. Along the way, we explored all of the many sanctioned crimes within Sharia that all violate U.S. law. Nevertheless, most are unaware or don't want to know the truth. Collectively, we've adopted a minimize and ignore strategy, in the words of Thomas Heghammer, by failing to come to grips with the true nature of the threat. We have repeatedly depicted the fundamentalist threat as a grand jihad, which is labeled advanced by the Muslim Brotherhood. One last look at the two axes of advance that we're confronted with and how they complement each other. Unfortunately, the fundamentalists aren't the only threat. There's the red-green axis that James Simpson and many others have been warning us about. And to make matters even more ominous for the future, many feel we're in the midst of a cold civil war with no common ground between progressives and conservatives. So let's look at some action steps. If we are going to win this battle, it will have to be done at the local level. The following represent just some of the actions you can take. Mary will post an expanded list at the United West webpage. We need your feedback, especially your thoughts where we should go in the future. What groups can we target? What topics should we cover that the webinar failed to address? Are there specific government agencies in your area that might be receptive to this information? Keep yourselves informed. There are many credible sources just a click away, and they're all free. The United West is a great resource along with many others Mary will post. When offered in your area, attend these presentations. Sharia Crime Stoppers will be more than happy to assist you if you'd like to sponsor a live presentation in your area or a webinar event. Our religious leaders have forgotten that they're shepherds to their flocks. The whole notion that the God of Islam and the God of Christians and Jews are the same needs to be addressed from the pulpit. The movement toward Chrislam needs to be called out for the theological fraud that it is. When people do speak out, support them. Support them by speaking out in their behalf. I told you about the sheriff in Barrow County, Georgia, who was publicly criticized for hosting Islamic threat training for his officers, and no one spoke out publicly in his support. And confront the deceivers. This webinar has given you ample information to challenge the Muslims and apologists who are misrepresenting their faith in jihadist history. Unless the Muslim Brotherhood is declared a terrorist organization, it won't be stopped. Only Secretary of State Pompeo can do this. And make contact with these local officials. One regular attendee of this webinar series has already had a face-to-face meeting with her local sheriff and police chief and has received their agreement to host Islamic threat training in 2019. As a way to open the door, ask your local law enforcement, social workers, and judicial official these questions. Or better yet, contact Sharia Crime Stoppers and we'll send you a copy. What steps are you and your agency prepared to take if you receive information someone in your jurisdiction is being radicalized? If a citizen asks for a list of indicators of jihadist radicalization, can you provide it? What are the indicators that you want to be immediately informed about? What are the Sharia crimes that violate federal or state laws? Can you recognize the differences between domestic violence and honor violence related crimes? If local school officials report that a young female Muslim student is being sent to their family's home of origin against her will in the Middle East or Africa, does this raise any red flags that she's in possible jeopardy? If a Muslim female reported she was raped, would you be concerned for family retaliation? If your officers encounter a teenage Muslim girl who is a runaway, who says her parents are forcing her to marry a much older man against her will, what steps should be taken? Unless you act, this will remain a true statement. So before we close for tonight, let's take one more look at the faces of those who are trying to kill us. The ones belonging to the international groups and Osama bin Laden's son, who is thought to be the new leader of a coalition between ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And most of the jihadists in America look just like us, unremarkable. Since July 1st, 2016, many have answered the call from ISIS and Al-Qaeda to attack America. Followed by, since August of 2014, many have tried to kill peace officers. Many others have attempted mass killings. Some jihadists are convicted refugees. Many are from the South. And over 79 are converts to Islam. And some are older jihadists, something the Obama administration wouldn't admit to. And many are active in Florida. And then there are the so-called soft jihadists of the Muslim Brotherhood. And oh, one last look at the deceivers introduced this evening. And the many brave women, both Muslim and non-Muslim, who are speaking out. And these as well. The law enforcement profession is inherently reactive. Little effort is given to anticipating the next threat to our communities, let alone the threat many of us can't see or experience. A famous World War II general reminds us this is an historical and generational problem to wait until it's too late. Returning to our Chinese scholar, it is my sincere hope that now you can answer all of these questions. Or the alternative is certain defeat. I will now turn the proceedings over to Mary, who will handle your parting questions and comments. Thank you very much for attending, and good night.
Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. We really appreciate your attendance. And the Q&A sessions have been very valuable, and we appreciate all that you've been doing to give us those questions, and David has done an excellent job of answering them. So thank you for all the Q&A sessions that we've had throughout this series. What I wanted to talk to you about to close out this, this series of webinars is to let you know about the United West. It's because of the United West that Sharia Crime Stoppers is able to be so successful. Tom Trento, the executive director of the United West, has allowed us to become an affiliate of the United West. And because of that, he has incorporated us into his website and gives us our own Sharia Crime Stoppers webpage, which enables us to alert you and everyone else about what we are doing in these training webinars. So one of the things I'd like to ask, if that at all possible, and I know this time at the holidays might be a little bit tough, but if you could make a donation to the unitedwest.org and go to their donate page, that would be very helpful in keeping us both successful in this mission. Tom Trento has a mission to stop Sharia in any kind of environment across the United States and the world. And he's got a motto that he fully believes and lives: one team, one fight. So I would encourage you to go to his website and get to know the United West, as well as following the Sharia Crime Stoppers. One last thing I want to tell you about is that Tom has been taking a group of people every year to Israel and doing a national security and biblical tour of Israel, which is incredible. Last year, I was blessed enough to be able to go, and it encompassed the entire time of going to the north end where Hezbollah is on the border, to the southern end where Gaza and the Palestinians are on the southern border. And trust me, it is 100% safe, but the places that you visit are incredible. And last year's was timed at the right time to be able to be in Jerusalem during the move of the embassy to Jerusalem. What an incredible time. And I was so blessed to be there. So please check out the Tour Israel page that we also have on the United West. And again, if there's any chance you could make a donation, that would be great to keep us all successful. So I hope you continue to look at our Sharia Crime Stoppers page to see what we're doing in 2019. We are not stopping. We are creating some new and webinars that you're going to want to see, and watch our page for all updates. And also we have a Facebook page. If anybody's on Facebook, please check that out as well. So it will all be updated there, and probably some emails from your contacts that we have received. But I'm going to let Dick talk to you a little bit more about 2019 and the radio show. So thank you everybody for joining us throughout this series. And Dick, I'll let you go from there.
Okay, well, thank you, Mary. I think you probably have figured out by now that Mary is the engine behind much of what gets done, and her work on the United West, across the United West, as well as on the Sharia Crime Stoppers page, the Facebook page, her activities on Twitter, etc., are all part of why we're as successful as we are. So it's a great team with David and Mary. One team, one fight is Tom Trento's theme, and you are now on the team. The question we're posing is, who's brave enough to stand against Sharia crime? Again, we are Sharia crime, and the answer is you are, because you're now fully trained as peace officers or social workers or prosecutors or jurists. You've got the skill set, and now you have the training to do your part to stand against Sharia crime. So we're happy to welcome you as graduates to the one team, and we invite you to participate in the one fight. Mary, let's move on to the next slide, and we'll talk about other things that are happening. As the one team, you're now trained to enforce a policy of zero tolerance for Sharia crime. No more excuses for not understanding. So you understand what David Boris has taught us. You understand that it is criminal to do female genital mutilation or rape or pedophilia or human trafficking. You've had training on honor violence and polygamy and child marriage. You can explain to other people that there is wife beating sanctioned by Sharia, sedition, and incredibly, Sharia is giving people a license to murder. You also understand that there is extreme punishment for apostasy and blasphemy. These are part of Sharia, not protected by the First Amendment. Sanctioned licenses are given to this kind of behavior in America and Canada. And you are now in a position with your background to enforce a zero tolerance policy and help other people understand that. Mary, let's move on if we can. And so we are obviously far from done. We have just gotten started in 2018. We appreciate your support. We'd like for you to keep posted on what 2019 will bring. There will be, David Boris will be back with additional law enforcement training. We're going to invite your help to help that get out into other places. Hopefully you're aware that on Friday nights, there's a radio program, Sharia Crime Stoppers Action Line with Mo and Meg, and that's on Global Patriot Radio. We are also going to specialize in 2019, trying to highlight individual crime stories, and that'll be referred to as the Sharia Crime Showcase. Stay tuned for more about that. Mary, let's move on and remind you that there is a way to get to the radio program, either live on Friday nights at 7 o'clock or after the event occurs. So if you're looking for Sharia Crime Stoppers Action Line, the radio show, you can Google Global Patriot Radio, or you can follow the link that is on the slide. As you're approaching the Friday night show, so on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, let's say, before the show starts, you'll find our description and the link to our program in the upcoming broadcast section on Global Patriot Radio. Within an hour after the episode closes, so perhaps as early as 9 or 10 o'clock at night, after the event is concluded and ongoing, after that, you can find the full podcast, again, at Global Patriot Radio, looking for the on-demand episode. So the podcasts are in the on-demand episode category. You can always identify us by our title, which is SCS Action Line. And of course, if you are active at 7 o'clock on Friday night and you're not watching on the computer, or you want to do it from your phone, you can always call the number 319-527-6709 between 7 and 9 o'clock on a Friday night, and you'll hear Mo and Meg, and you'll hear the guests. If you have something to contribute as a comment or question, you can press 1 from your phone and join in the conversation. So again, the key message is the podcasts are always up there and they're in the on-demand episode category. Okay, Mary, let's move on. Well, speaking of Friday nights, we have at 7 o'clock this Friday, the 21st, a very, very special new part of the program. We're going to have a radio theater. If you remember, some of us used to be listening to the radio in our homes as children or young adults, listening to radio drama that was spiked our imagination. Well, we're going to do that Friday night this week, the 21st. We're going to have the Sharia Crime Stoppers players give a dramatic reading of Spooked, which is a story by Tober Mori. Spooked is the notion that where can we find justice? Can we find justice in this world? Where else what might we find justice? This is a story about 270 million individual human beings whose life was cut short because of the license to kill that is part of Sharia. So we encourage you to listen to the drama. We'd love to get your feedback. Again, at this point, we want to thank you for all of your support of our programs. We want to invite you to contact us through the website or the Facebook page. Again, suggestions are always welcome. Spearpoint 911 at ShariaCrimeStoppers.org is the best way to reach us by email. Spearpoint 911 at ShariaCrimeStoppers.org. Thank you for a great fall with the webinar. David, thank you, and Mary, and we invite all of you to have a great holiday season and join us in the new year. There's lots of work to do. Thank you very much. Good night.